Hello and welcome to Access Sportsnet. Lakers, driven by your Southern California Honda dealers. Chris McGee, James Worthy, Derek Fisher, Mike Bresnahan, Allie's going to join us in a little bit. The Lakers lose in Phoenix. They drop a season-high 7th in a row. And with 3 games left, the Lakers are officially eliminated out of the play-in tournament. Disappointing, for sure. Also reality, big game, James.
I think reality is the key word to focus on because it is real. And unbelievable for people to think that we're not even going to be in the play-in game when this team was assembled over the summer and predicted to win a championship. And so it's just I don't really have words for this season, with the exception of a lot of disarray, injuries. A lot of players having to get used to each other, never really developed. Combine that with the injuries and the different lineups, just never really got your engine to run the way it was supposed to run because you had too many parts. You had to replace every now and then. The only thing I can go to is, the 7 to 11 games that they should have won. The games we looked at the other day when they had, big leads and blew them in the second half. And, so those games you'll look at those and you'll focus on that. But this was a very disappointing season, despite, and it's not over yet, but despite all the uphill battles they had, still kind of disappointing for the Lakers.
Yep.
The Lakers to not even be able to make the play-in game. But this is where we find ourselves right now.
Yeah, and I think the flip side of what James is articulating, right, is LeBron, Anthony Davis, Russell Westbrook only played 21 games together this season so far out of 79 games, right? So just that part alone tells you they probably would have figured out a way to win a few more games if those guys had played. Even with that, though, when it's all said and done, the difference is going to almost come down to the tiebreaker scenario between the Lakers and the Spurs, right? Only 2 games back, but it equals 3 because the Spurs have the tiebreaker.
Yeah.
So out of 82-game season, there's going to be 1 game that weighed so much that it's going to prevent the Lakers from even being able to get in.
Yeah.
And as a coach and even sometimes as an athlete, like that's where you have to start to challenge yourself, right? Of like in terms of growth and looking forward, how do we find a way? Even with guys out, I guarantee you every person in that locker room feels like there's another game this season that had they been more focused, more locked in, more engaged, following the game plan, more disciplined, they could have figured out a way to win 1 or 2 more games that would have allowed them to get in.
And you guys both bring up great points. And Brez, on Sunday, when 82 games are finished, the Lakers will look in the mirror and they'll say 10 teams in the West are better than us. 10 teams in the West better than the Lakers. That's hard to imagine when you go back to September and October.
Cold, harsh reality, no doubt about it. This team was the second choice to win the NBA championship back in October when the season started. Brooklyn was the first choice. They have their own issues to contend with, but they will be in the play-in tournament. And in my 18 years of covering this team, and I've covered some Laker teams that won 17 games, like Kobe's last year, but you knew that team was not going to be a championship contender. This probably qualifies as the most underachieving season that I've covered, just because the expectations were so high. And Westbrook was supposed to be able to fill in some gaps when LeBron was hurt or when AD was down. And that never seemed to quite gel, even though he has played better the last couple weeks. But still, Geet, there's nothing, no better word than what James said. It's disappointing. And there are so many games you can say, okay, wait, they lost twice to OKC. They lost a triple OT game to Sacramento. They lost here in LA to Indiana when Karis LeVert went nuts in the second half. They lost to Houston and Portland post-All-Star break. Both those teams have been out of it for months, seemingly. And here's what you're left with, 3 games that are pretty much meaningless the rest of the way.
Yeah, I mean, even AD was saying in the postgame the other day, he was kind of reflecting on what could have been. I mean, for the second straight season, he's missed half the games. LeBron missed 23 so far. They're just 6 and 17 in those games. Kendrick Nunn, who we've used his name many times, not that he's a savior, but he never suited up in a Laker uniform. So backs up against the wall to kind of start the season, and it's just the way it went. But you can't make excuses. I mean, I think Fish said it best. The one thing that hit him during this rough stretch from the All-Star break on, he said, was that the Lakers never really figured it out. I mean, teams all have to go through the same thing, injuries and health and safety protocols and all kinds of stuff. And it's a different level for every team, but Lakers just never able to put it together. The flip side of that, and we're not going to spend enough time on them for sure, but the Phoenix Suns, they deserve to get a little love because tonight they won their 63rd game. That's the best in their franchise's history. They look like a team, like we talked about in the pregame show, after you guys lost and what you looked like when you came back the next year, that's ready to win a championship. They've been dominant from start to finish. They used a huge third quarter. They had 38 assists. The balance, Big Game, we'll just spend a little time on them, but are they your favorite?
Yes. They've been the most efficient and the most consistent of all the top-tier teams that we expect to win. You think of Brooklyn, you think of the Lakers, you think of, everybody that's supposed to be Milwaukee even. Phoenix has shown that, like Fish said, once you get a taste of it, win or lose, especially if you lose, if you lose it, you really have an incentive to get back. And they have the players that can do it. They have the coach that can do it. And so when you taste that honey, you want more of it. And so they're on their way if they continue to play, barring no injuries.
And they deserve a lot of credit. I think, the job that James Jones has done in the front office, Monty Williams, as a head coach, the patience, right? To go 8-0 in 2020 and still not make the playoffs in the bubble would have been easy to start tinkering and trying to figure out, what kind of crazy moves can we make to try to shortcut the process. The Chris Paul move they didn't go try to find a young superstar, right? They went out and found the right superstar guy to bring in and balance their team out. And then after coming up short in the finals last year, the value of sticking with the group, that even though they've gone through some disappointments, like that toughness and that connective tissue as a team, like when they step out on the court this year in the 63 games that they've won, they're carrying the disappointment from 2020, being disrespected, not being able to make the playoffs, even though they went 8-0, losing in the finals last year. So every time they step on the court in 21-22, they're still trying to show everybody got a chip on the shoulder.
Nobody in the MVP conversation.
And that's when you have a new group, it's hard to walk in with the chip on your shoulder that way. And that was also something that contributed to the Lakers not ever quite figuring it out.
At Brez, did they also have to sell Ayton on, wasn't he up for a new contract?
Yeah.
And they had to sell him. So that right there lets you know that the organization, they have their finger on the pulse, because here's a young kid that had a great season, and, they didn't really sign him like he wanted to get signed, and he was patient because they believe in what they have right there. That was, to me, was a good sign that this team is whole and complete.
He's going to get paid now, isn't he, Brett?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would not be worried if I was him at all. This is a really interesting game because you see the juxtaposition between a team that has played together pretty much injury-free the last two seasons versus this Lakers campaign. James, I think you said in the conference room where we watched the games, you were like, look at this Phoenix team. They know where each other likes to stand. They know where their favorite spots are. Chris Paul's like a surgeon out there, as opposed to the Lakers. It's hard to believe in game 79, they're still trying to figure out who's who and who's what. Was it 39 different starting lineups? That's what happens in an injury-ravaged season where the guys just don't get enough time on the court together.
Just so everyone knows, like, as you look at this, trouble in the valley, swept by the Suns. We know how last year ended, and the Suns made sure that everyone knows that was no mistake as they dominate the Lakers this season, each win by double digits.
Yeah, average margin about 17 right there.
Listen, we kind of touched on this in the pregame show, and I want to get to it before we talk about the highlights. We live it, right? We do shows pre and post game. You guys are here. We're here on the non-game nights doing our hour-long show, and all the people in the control room are a big part of it too. And we're always going over numbers, especially as the Lakers would slide, and we're talking all the time about it, whether at our desk or we're here on this set, them in my ear. There are just some numbers that are hard to wrap your head around, that are staggering when you think of this Laker team. Bottom line, Brez has said it all year, and so have you guys. They didn't defend. Where they ranked defensively has been near the bottom the entire league. They had spurts where they showed that they can defend, but just not enough to win consistently. On January 7th, they won their 4th game in a row. That was a season high for wins in a row. Only 4. From that moment on, we are now 3 months later. 3 months. They have not won consecutive games. Every team in the league has, from Orlando to Portland to Houston to OKC. That's pretty incredible to me. There's been 39 games. They're 10-29 in those games. So when you wonder why they're not in the playoffs, that's why. Also, All-Star break. They're 4-17. They're 4-17 after the All-Star break. Only Portland, 1 out of 30 teams, is worse than them, James. So when you hear that, and then you combine it with everything else you guys have already talked about, we're not surprised we're here.
Yeah, I mean, it takes some type of consistency and some type of formula, and you gotta have, one thing to go on. And I go back to preseason. It was a little slow start. Guys didn't really, I know that veterans in particularly, they don't really look at that. But that's the time that they should have nailed down one thing at least to start the season. And it should have been some type of defensive continuity so they could at least have that. But they didn't have anything going into the season. No consistency, no camaraderie, guys getting to know each other. And it just lasted the whole season. And I think when you have LeBron and AD and